Hey, what's ready? Welcome back to News Dose, and I feel like we already have a candidate for one of the more unexpected and maybe even spicier stories for 2026. I mean, I certainly wasn't expecting a legendary RPG developer to call out Xbox and Bethesda to start the year. Yeah, here we are, and fans are going crazy over some of the headlines that's been going around today. So we're going to get into all of that, as well as a Switch 2 update for its pricing, because it sounds like it could be fluid, to say the least. First, though, I do want to thank my supporters on Patreon and on YouTube memberships. Thank you just so much for what you do, and you will receive this video through early access. Let's go get right into things, though, starting off with the Resident Evil showcase. I believe we talked about this a few weeks back, but it is now officially slated for January 15th at 2 p.m. Pacific time. So here in just a couple days from the making of this video, and it's going to be about 12 minutes long. Now, of course, the main highlight game will be Resident Evil Requiem as expected, and I mean, I don't really need to see any more gameplay personally. I've been sold on this game for a very long time already, but the thing is that there is a rumor that there could be an additional game announcement at this showcase. Now, I don't know how much stock I want to put into that rumor, but hypothetically, if they tease another game, there are a few credible rumors that are floating around about a Code Veronica and a Resident Evil 0 remake. So that assuming that one or both of those games are in development, then we could maybe get our first tease for one of those games as early as this showcase, but in my opinion, I wouldn't really go into this showcase with that as an expectation. More so, I would kind of view it as a potential bonus, because if it happens, that's great, but don't be surprised if they hold those announcements back for a later date after the release of Resident Evil 9. Oh, and High on Life 2 is officially heading over to the Switch 2. Of course, a couple weeks back, we talked about its potential launch for the Switch 2 because I believe it leaked through one of those rating boards. I mean, like I always like to say, they are legitimately some of the biggest leakers the industry has. I really don't know why more companies don't have a word with them about those leaks, but, nonetheless, Squanch Games made it official today. You can see their announcement here, which reads, High on Life 2 is coming to Nintendo Switch 2, and you can pre-order physical editions today, because why settle for a digital copy when you could eternally admire the work of a comedy classic on your shelf? Now, the only problem with that statement, though, is that it's not really a true physical copy. It's instead a game keycard, so you do have to kind of keep that in mind. But that's kind of where the Switch 2 is. Most third-party games are keycards by this point, so it's more or less expected. Though I will say I would be very interested to see the data for how well keycards are selling compared to true physical releases. Nonetheless, though, I mean, High on Life 2 for the Switch 2 is absolutely fantastic. The first game was a massive surprise hit, and I think the visuals actually do suit the Switch 2 very well. If you are interested, though, its release date is set for April 21st. Moving on, though, unfortunately, some notable studios were closed today by Meta. Meta is really the leading company for virtual reality headsets, and they acquired quite a few studios to push their VR headsets years back, and that included some fan-favorite companies like Twisted Pixel and Sanzaru Games. Now, if you don't know who they are, Twisted Pixel used to be owned by Xbox, and they were actually the studio behind Explosion Man, and then Sanzaru Games, they have more of a reputation with PlayStation because of their work on Sly Cooper. And that's the thing, because Sanzaru Games, even after their relationship with Sony, I mean, they've gone on to be a premier studio. I mean, you can even argue that they've made two of the absolute best VR games, just period, being Asgard's Wrath 1 and Asgard's Wrath 2. I mean, these are true AAA RPG experiences for VR, which there's very few of those. But unfortunately, it's being reported that Meta closed down both studios. It was announced today that both studios were hit by layoffs, and then shortly after, Andy THPS made this comment on Twitter. I've just been laid off. It appears the entire Twisted Pixel Games studio has been shut down. Sanzaru Games 2. So just a very unfortunate situation all around, especially considering the talent and IP involved. I mean, just kind of knowing those studios, I don't think this situation speaks towards the games and people involved near as much as I think it's a statement as to where VR gaming is. I mean, I have several VR headsets myself, and I think it's a really cool piece of technology, but it hasn't really grown the way that I think a lot of people hoped it would. including Meta. I mean, we also saw what happened to the PlayStation VR headset 2. It just completely fell off the map, and now Sony doesn't support it really at all. All right, now let's just go and get into this Bethesda situation, though, because the Obsidian Entertainment co-founder and former Fallout New Vegas writer, Chris Avellone, had quite the criticism for Bethesda and their work on the Fallout series. Apparently, he's not a fan of the new style Fallout formula or even the new Amazon shows, so he took to social media and wrote, "I don't think Bethesda hates Fallout, they just don't fully understand its roots, and arguably, they don't care. They own the franchise, and they just want to do their spin on Fallout and make that the norm. This usually translates into a colorful, shallow theme park with some interesting DLC exceptions like Far Harbor, Point Lockout, and I was one of the ones who liked the Pit. Still, theme parks are fun for some folks, so if people enjoy it, that's fine with me. As for me, I don't hate Bethesda. There are things they do well, open world exploration, and there are things that they do badly, telling linear stories in open world games, and their inability to understand how to use the speech skill. But every developer has their pros and cons." So again, obviously, he's not a fan of what Bethesda has done to Fallout, which, to be fair, I think that's perfectly fine. I know a lot of people have been going at him and telling him about how he's wrong, but you have to remember that it's only his opinion at the end of the day. He is allowed to have his own opinion, just as you're allowed to have your own opinion. But at the same time, when you put your opinion out there for the public to see, then yeah, fans are allowed to disagree, which seems to have been the case here. He has at least removed those comments once online, and just based on responses from other articles, that was likely because he himself faced a lot of criticism for his remarks. So I'm just going to go and give you my perspective and how I view it, because the way I see it is that pretty much since Fallout 3, and especially with Fallout 4, Chris Avellone isn't necessarily alone in his feelings, because there has been a group of people that have criticized Bethesda for their take on Fallout 3 and Fallout 4. You know, it has deviated quite a bit from the first two games. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing either. I mean, first off, Fallout 3 and Fallout 4 are some of the most beloved games of all time. So clearly, Bethesda must have done something right, or else they wouldn't be nearly as popular as they are now. But I also want to point out the evolution of games. I know there is a group of people that wants Fallout to go back to that more isometric point of view. I've seen a lot of that online in the past, and it would be cool if they went back and did another entry like that. But you also have to realize that Fallout isn't the only franchise that has significantly changed since the 80s and 90s. I mean, look at Zelda as one such example. I mean, if you go back to something like Zelda 2, a large portion of that game can be described as an action platformer. So does that mean that every Zelda game should stick with that playstyle, and if they don't, then they don't know the roots of Zelda? No, absolutely not. It's a franchise that's allowed to change and morph over time. And in fact, even with Breath of the Wild, that game plays drastically different than some of the previous Zelda games. And I think that's what Fallout has done as well. I think Bethesda took the original Fallout experience, they kept the core of it, and they transformed it into what they felt could fit into a more 3D environment. So, I mean, technically, yes, Chris Avellone is correct, and, they put their own spin on it, but I don't think that that necessarily makes it any less of a Fallout game, as he's kind of implying, because for one, it clearly spoke to fans. Now, is the writing as good as the original 2 or New Vegas? And you can argue that it's not. But at the end of the day, fans enjoy Bethesda's version of Fallout, and for a very good reason. They're very good games. What I'll say, though, is that if Chris Avellone feels this way, maybe he should go pitch another Fallout game to Microsoft, because I kind of feel like they would greenlight it right now. They love Fallout as of this moment because that show has kind of, catapulted it into a whole different territory of popularity. And I think there's room for all kinds of different Fallout experiences. If you look at the Metroid franchise, you have the 2D Metroids, and then you have the 3D Metroid Prime games. If you look at Ninja Gaiden, you have the 2D Ninja Gaiden games, and then you have the 3D ones. I think that Fallout could do the same thing. You could have those isometric Fallout experiences, and then you could have games that are like Fallout 3 and Fallout 4. I don't think that makes any of those games any less of a Fallout experience, but yes, they are different. Who knows, though, maybe he could be the one to go back and do a smaller isometric Fallout experience like the original 2. But what do you think about all this, though? Do you think that he has a point or not? Now, before we go, though, fans, and actually in this case, investors as well, are freaking out about a potential price hike for the Switch 2. Nintendo stock price in Japan has reportedly decreased by 33% these past 5 months, and reportedly, that's because investors are spooked by price hikes, a lack of first-party hits, and United States European discounts over the holiday period. Now, at least in terms of first-party games, I imagine that's going to pick up a lot throughout 2026 and 2027. I don't really see a reason to be overly concerned by its first 6 months alone, and quite frankly, I thought it was actually fairly strong with the likes of Mario Kart World, Metroid Prime 4, Donkey Kong Bonanza, and Pokemon Legends ZA. But at least in terms of pricing, I think that's a legitimate concern to have. And in fact, the Nintendo president was recently asked about it because of the increased cost of RAM. And he said that we procure from suppliers based on our medium to long-term business plans, but the current memory market is very volatile. There is no immediate impact on earnings, but it is something that we must monitor closely. Then when asked if it could increase its prices depending on its future procurement cost, Furukawa said that was hypothetical and he couldn't comment. So the fact that he refused to answer more or less tells us that a price hike is absolutely on the table. But they're approaching that situation with caution and have nothing to announce as of this moment. You know, they don't want to raise the price if they don't have to, because a large portion of their strategy is to be affordable. A price hike would kind of ruin that for them. The fact of the matter is, though, is that these AI data centers have caused a major problem for a lot of these hardware-based companies, and things could get a lot worse before they get better. I mean, it really all just kind of depends on how long the RAM crisis goes on for, because if it goes all the way to 2027 or beyond, then the price for technology could go up across the board. And that's not just for Nintendo. That also impacts Sony, Xbox, and even Valve. Prices for everything could go up, so I don't really think that it's shocking to hear that Nintendo is viewing the situation with their options open. I mean, we'll just have to kind of wait and see what happens, but it is definitely a possibility. Anyways, though, that's going to be it for this episode, but until next time, make sure to subscribe, ring that bell, and peace out.